Welcome to this edition of Decryptage. We are going to talk about factoring as a trade finance solution to Africa's trade finance deficit. We are pleased to welcome Mrs. Kanayo Awani, Executive Vice President of the Intra African Trade and Export Development Bank, Afreximbank. According to her, Africa is on the right track to make good use of this financial tool, which could increase the continent's chances of financing more businesses, especially SMEs. Mrs. Kanayo Awani, thank you and welcome to Africa 24 English. Africa currently accounts for less than 1% of global factoring volume. Despite its huge potential, what do you see as the main barrier to the adoption of factoring in Africa, and how confident are you that more African countries will adopt the practice?
My confidence draws from the evidence. The evidence is that 15 years ago, when we started these workshops on the sidelines of the trade finance seminars, Africa was only contributing less than 1%, about 0.5%, less than 0.5% actually, less than 0.5%. Today, with the efforts that we've made, the strategy that we've developed, the partnerships that we've forged, the work we're doing in the legal environment, the financing that we're providing, the volumes have grown. Today, at that time, there were only 3 countries that were doing factoring: South Africa, Morocco, and Egypt. That was it. Today, it's in 18 countries. The volume has grown to not less than 1%. As of 2023, the volume of factoring for Africa was 1.25% of the global volume. I know it is still small, but we have grown from about 16 billion euros to 47 billion euros in volume for African volume today. So there is, I think the stars are aligned towards its growth. The stars are aligned. I just mentioned the AFCFTA. I just mentioned because for the business to happen, people have to know about it. And for the business to happen, we have to have factoring businesses. We have to have banks that are intentional about offering a factoring. We have to have non-bank financial institutions emerge to offer factoring. And they imagine, today we have about 186 in the continent from about 18 countries in the continent. That's huge progress. And we're getting there. We're not resting on our oars. Today we're in Namibia. Earlier in the year we were in Zimbabwe, to go and sow the seeds that I know will sprout. The other things that are in favor here, aside from the AFCFTA and the growth in intra-African trade, but also it also spurs regional value chains, if you know what I mean. The drive for industrialization of the African continent, the drive to produce what we consume, the drive to have a more value addition and expand the value chains are all factors that will support factoring. In a country like this, that is getting into developing its oil and gas sector, I mentioned it in my speech today, that it will make sense for the oil service, for the government to formulate its local participation, local content programs around that industry, and as those locals and those services to the oil majors are provided by locals. And if they are provided by locals, those are all candidates for factoring. Why? They render services to oil companies, oil majors. All majors will not pay them on day one. All those majors, and you can extrapolate this to any industry, where you have a big company and a small producer, a small supplier. All companies have their credit terms that they will offer their small, but the small producer, the small farmer, the small supplier will need cash to continue their business. And that's where the factoring factor comes in, to discount their receivables and take responsibility for collecting them, while the small SME has immediate cash to continue producing, to continue their business. So that's part of my optimism, the industrialization of our continent, the AFCFTA in place, the great work Afreximbank is doing in terms of delivering a strategy.
Factoring can be a lifeline for SMEs, providing them with liquidity and financial flexibility, but it also requires countries to adopt some legislation to ensure a smooth transition. How does Afreximbank plan to raise awareness among African countries, particularly on the adoption of the model law? Will Namibia also adopt factoring?
No, the target is for the entire continent to adopt the model law, especially, when we developed the model law, we had already determined that the weak environment, legal and regulatory environment, was an impediment to factoring thriving. So we engaged experts to, look at all the legal systems on the continent, which is several. You have the civil, you have the common law, you have the Roman Dutch in this part of the world, and you also have some principles of Islamic law. To look at all of them and come up with what I'll call, a common denominator, to see the basic principles, so we've done the work. We use experts in factoring, overseas. So we've done the work, and now we're now trying to see how, and that's the work we've been doing, to see how countries can adopt and domesticate the law. And we made some good progress. Egypt is one of those. They had a law, but they now use some of the principles of our model law to revise their laws. And the evidence is the fact that since then, since about 5 years or so now, factoring companies have grown from a handful to about almost 40. We have Congo, and we have, I think the biggest progress is in the Francophone West African countries, where the Central Bank of West African States is helping. They adopted the law themselves and are helping us to push it into the various countries. And right now, I think we have 6 of them that have, adopted and promulgated the law.
Speaking of African countries embracing factoring, one of the problems facing the continent's development is the gap between the goodwill of development partners and the willingness of governments to adopt certain policies and regulations so that development can take place. Are you facing the same challenges as Afreximbank, and how are you addressing them?
If I understood your question, I'll have to answer it in the context of factoring. And that's the essence of what we're doing today. The partnership that we're trying to build in this and use to drive factoring is to bring together all the stakeholders, governments, as well as the private sector and financial institutions. And in a country like this, we would like to work with the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, the Development Bank of Namibia, to foster the agenda in terms of supporting the inclusiveness, and the equity associated with SMEs. And that's what factoring offers. It is more so because you will know that the AFCFTA is a veritable instrument for us as Africans to promote intra-African trade. The trade will be done by SMEs. So it's all in that agenda. And the AFCFTA also has also negotiated a protocol on women and youth. These are all things that are important to the government of Namibia. So it's a partnership of all stakeholders, and that's what we're trying to do, to forge it, to promote factoring in support of SMEs in the country.
Mrs. Kanayo Awani, thank you for answering Africa's 24 questions. And to our viewers, thank you for watching this program. Stay tuned to Africa 24 English for the best African news in streaming and replay on our website, africa24tv.com, and on all our social networks.